All right, who has the first question?
Oh,
Go ahead.
sure. So I know you worked on Pulp Fiction, so I was wondering.
No, I didn't. That's an internet myth. I didn't work on Pulp Fiction. Don't believe everything you read on the internet, especially things that happened before you were born. No, I'm kidding. Yes.
So I was gonna ask, like, what was the energy like working with people like John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson?
Well, it's interesting because I'd say to this day, Pulp Fiction is one of the best sets I've been on in my entire career. And I credit that to the quality of the script. I mean, the fact that he was able to make a movie with John Travolta, Bruce Willis, Uma Thurman, Sam Jackson for under $8 million was because everybody read that dang script and was like, I need to be in this movie. I want to be a part of this. And everybody from the cast to the crew was there because they wanted to be there, not just for the paycheck, to be a part of this. And, you know, I mean, usually I came in the last month of the shoot. Usually by that point, you know, everybody's either broken up or, you know, already looking for their next job. But on Pulp Fiction, every Friday night, it's like, pass around a flyer. This is where we're going for drinks. And everybody went, even John Travolta.
Nice. Awesome. Do you have a question? Go ahead.
So you was a writer for Mad TV. Do you have any scripts that you felt like was going too far?
I was not technically a writer on Mad TV because they refused to give the cast writing credits. It wasn't until my final season when I said, you got this character, the UBS guy that everybody loves, I ain't doing a sketch unless you let me write it. And that was the only way I was able to get a writing credit on Mad TV.
So you just wrote that character on?
Well, no, the thing was, in sketch comedy, anybody who's worked on SNL or any sketch show will tell you, the actors always write.
Yep.
Because especially on Mad TV, I mean, a lot of the conceptual stuff came from the writers, but the character stuff came from the actors. You know, because we mostly created those characters. I'd say the one exception was the Funky Walker Dirty Talker character. One of the writers, Gary Campbell, came up with that sketch in, I think, the second season. And I was like, well, black dude dancing around? No, I ain't doing that. But then over the summer, I thought, actually, that's kind of funny. He's funky and he's grooving. And then I came back to Gary, like, hey, can we do that sketch? He didn't even remember it. Like, which one? But, and then Mary Shear was pregnant and she had been doing this, you know, character she was doing, you know, the lady with all the plastic surgery. And that was our gimmick for guest stars, interviewing guest stars. But when Mary went away, we need another sketch where we can have guest stars. Like, how about this Funky Walker Dirty Talker? Like, okay, sure. All right, now you're doing a sketch with Halle Berry, Jennifer Love Hewitt. You know, I'm like, yes.
That's awesome.
Actually, that's where I first met Gilbert Gottfried. Rest in peace.
Yeah. All right, anybody else? Go ahead.
As far as your voice acting chart with all the DC characters, are you going to be acting live action in a superhero medium?
You're asking me if I'm going to be acting in the DC superhero universe live action? Why are you asking an actor what jobs the actor's going to get? I don't go to DC and go boom, boom, boom. Let me play this. That's not how it works. Ask Michael B. Jordan.
Okay, go ahead.
In your, sorry.
No, you and then him.
Okay. In your opinion, which is your most iconic character that you voiced?
I'm sorry, say that again, louder.
In your opinion, which is your most iconic character that you've voiced?
Most iconic character you voiced?
Well, that's actually an unanswerable question. Because as a performer, I don't decide what is iconic. That is the audience's job over time. You know, because, I mean, I think about this all the time. There were stars in the 30s and 40s who were the hugest stars who we have no idea. And the same thing happens with work, you know, especially in voiceover. There's stuff people watched when they were kids that they still hold on to 20 years later. There's other stuff that went down the toilet with that cereal.
Go ahead.
So, given the fact that you have over 200 credits or acting credits, what would you say has been your most challenging role for the person? What's an accomplishment that you know you nailed something completely different?
Well, the most challenging roles are the bad ones. Because it's always easier to work with a great script and amazingly creative people like Genndy Tartakovsky, Dave Filoni, Bruce Timm, Dwayne McDuffie. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to work with some of the most amazingly talented writers and creators, Greg Weisman on Young Justice, So all of that work, which is usually the work that people respond to and hold on to for generations, those were all easy, but crappy one episode of Pound Puppies that nobody even remembers I was in.
I remember the show. I don't remember much else about it.
No, Pound Puppies was actually a cute
It was
show.
a cute show.
But I don't remember the bad ones. Because you can't let that sit in your head. That drags you down.
Yeah.
Better to just live in the power and light of the great ones. And hope they bring me back.
Go ahead.
A few years ago, we got the conclusion to Samurai Jack. What was the experience like from the time that the last season aired to the final season? Did you ever think that it would come back? And how was the experience working on the final season?
Well, the bringing back of Samurai Jack was wonderful on a number of levels. One, because Genndy wrapped up that series in the most incredible way. I mean, it was 14 years from when we finished the first run to the final wrap-up season. And he had always wanted to complete the story. And he'd been talking about it since, the original run, which makes sense because when you put it in the dang theme song, gotta get back to the past, then you gotta do it. I mean, it's like Friends, I'll be there for you. They can't not be there for each other. It says it in the song. But the fact that he took those 14 years, I mean, I look at that season 5 of Samurai Jack as like, this is what the show would have evolved into had we kept going for the 14 seasons. Because now Jack was in a whole different place, and he was dark, he'd lost his sword, it's like, I mean, and who has the talent to do that? I mean, we've seen a lot of franchises where they're like, oh, let's go to this, let's go to that. I've never seen anybody do it that well. So, and it also, as an actor, made me push my game up to another level. It's like, oh dang, I got more lines in this one season than I had in all 4 previous ones. And it's like heavily emotional, and I remember, I'd worked with Tara Strong for 10, 15, 20 years, and she blew me away. It's like, I never seen you do something that amazing, so it was a gift,
We'll go you and then you, and then we'll go you.
Okay. Second round.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I know you voiced Futurama, and I was gonna ask you if there's Futurama, Simpsons, Family Guy, that type of humor. What's your your favorite type of show out of those?
Well, actually, that's interesting. I mean, I don't think anybody would say that the humor in Family Guy is similar to the humor in Futurama or The Simpsons. Yeah. I mean, they're on the same channel, but those are not the same shows. Yeah. Actually, Futurama and The Simpsons aren't even the same kind of comedy. But the one thing they all have in common is incredibly talented writers. And the fact that, Futurama and Family Guy both came back from the dead. I don't know. Although maybe Futurama, Family Guy, Samurai Jack shows coming back from, being canceled, and what do they all have in common? Me.
So, you've been in the game for so long, you've done so much, and you've seen the industry transform in many different ways. What advice could you offer aspiring voice actors, aspiring actors in both live action and animation, trying to break into the industry, how to hone their craft, and how to really get to eventually become someone on your caliber?
Well, it's interesting because you get asked a lot, what advice would you give to aspiring voice actors? I'm like, I'm old. The world I started voice acting in is completely different from the world now. So my advice would be relatively useless. Unless I could say, okay, step one, get a time machine, go back 25 years, and then do this. Start out on a sketch comedy show and do a lot of characters, and then figure out, oh, wait, if I did this without wigs and makeup, I could just change the voices. That'd be a lot easier. And then start your voiceover career like that. But again, not really applicable. Although the real advice that I would give to people is understand that voice acting is a misnomer because the acting comes before the voice. It is more important to be able to bring this imaginary character to life for an audience. Then you make funny voices. Once you can embody a character, then what you do with the voice, that comes secondary.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and it was going to be you.
Okay. So since you voice so many characters, and you are basically representation of all of these characters you voice, how does it make you feel knowing that generations of people of color look up to you and the characters you play in the roles? How does that make you feel that people look up to you?
Well, it's interesting because I started out doing voices before representation was on anybody's mind. I mean, back in the 90s, if it was a leading character of color, then they would make sure to cast a person of color. It's like, well, because we're gonna have to have them do press. But secondary characters, nobody cared about. Like if it's character got 3 lines who's a black guy, it's like, we ain't gonna write an extra paycheck for that. Which is why when I was starting out as an actor of color, you could survive if you could only voice one kind of character, because there weren't enough roles that were specifically going to be cast by actors of color. So nowadays, this whole idea about authenticity, the authenticity of the casting is far less important than the authenticity of the story. Whose perspective is being put out there? That's what's important about representation. That's why Static Shock was so, important at the time. Not just the color of his skin, but the story they were telling. The fact that this was the set of the world of Dakota that it was set in reflected the real world that we as people of color lived in. And even though it was imaginary and it was superheroes, there were issues that we reflected. It's like, oh yes, I recognize that, which I think was the similar impact of Spider-Man in the 60s. Because before that, superheroes were fantasy. Nobody really relates to Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I remember when I was being chased by orcs. No. But when you have stories like Spider-Man or Static Shock, where they're dealing with emotions, situations that we as real people in the world deal with, but it's also fantasy and powers, and superhero, that is very, very special. And for so many generations, people of color did not, get stories like that. I mean, if there was somebody of color in some thing, it was rarely fantasy. It was way too real. It was the defiant ones. Sidney Poitier is tied, handcuffed to another dude, But the fact that, that the worlds of fantasy and, video games and all of that stuff are now becoming more diverse with more diverse perspectives. That is the stuff that's powerful. That's what's important.
All right, and that wraps up the session. Do you have enough time to do some photos with the press?
Oh, okay.